Welcome to the second part of the sales pricing module and pricing PowerPoint that we started in class last week. I'm going to start off by sharing the screen for the sales frequency. Let's see. So we're going to jump in. Of course, it didn't open up in the same place that I wanted it to. Let's try this again. Right. Okay, sales frequency. So we're in the clicker book on page 148, and the merchandising book on page 142. So before we jump to there, I'm going to also then go over to sharing I updated the ratio examples page. So this is in the financial analysis part, and it has down here in the bottom are the ratios for you can play around with for current assets, current liabilities, and days receivable and so forth. Kind of plug those in. And then the tab here for MVR and CVI, and also you can play around with that a little bit. And then the sales examples for mean, median, and mode. So there's a couple of screens that we'll go into the discussion about mean, median, and mode. But here, this is that price ladder that I talked about last week in column C. These are organized from the most expensive to the least expensive, so 8,500 down to 1,795. And in this example, the number of units sold, and we'll say this is in a given month. So if one of them was sold at 8,500, then that would be $8,500, the retail price. There were two of them sold at 6,300, so that's 12,600 and so forth. So getting down to the bottom, we're adding these up, and that comes to 95,695. That was 28 units that were sold. If you divide 95,695 by 28, you'll get the average sale or the mean sale right over here. The middle sale would be the casket that falls in the middle. So with 11 caskets being sold, then it would be the number 6. So you'd have 5 that are above it, you'd have 5 that are below it, and this is right in the middle. So the median right now is 3,850. We happen to sell 4 of those as well. That doesn't really have anything to do with the median. But then the mode is the one that's sold most frequently, and that's down here. It was 7 times this casket was sold, so the mode would be 1,795 for the most frequent. All right, so we're going to touch base with the mean, median, and mode again. And if there's any examples in a test or anything like that, it would be fairly simple like this. All right, trying to figure out what the average would be. You'll be able to take a calculator with you to do some basic calculations. So if you did that, you'd come up with the correct answers. Now, keeping in mind that if you're trying to figure out the median, and we had even number of caskets, so let's remove, or we'll add one. How's that sound? Let's add. We're going to add here in the bottom. So we're going to insert. We'll call it casket 11. Call this one casket 12. And then in the beginning, in the middle here, 1805. Let's say I'm going to sell one of those. Okay, so it changed the average, as you can see. It changed the number of units, was 29. And now when we're trying to figure out the median, we have to use numbers 6 and 7. We have to add the 2 of them together. So in the example over here, I'm going to add, let's see, I'll just graphically, we'll do it this way. I'm going to That did not work. Let's try it again. Okay. Do the same thing with this. Okay, so we have our two numbers there. We're going to add them up together. So we're going to sum them. That's what that number would be, is 7245. And then we're going to divide that by 2. So divide by 2 equals, and we'll make this a number. And so now this would become our median in this example. So anyway, I'm going to now just in this example now 3623 is the middle, or the mean, excuse me, the median. If there's any questions, certainly see me about that. What I'll do is that down there. Okay, and I can use some. Okay. So if there's any question, you can see me about that. So let's all right. So screen sharing, let's go back to here. So as in the sales frequency chart, the price ladder and so forth, we're trying to find ways to analyze the sales of of caskets primarily. Could be vaults, and really could be any merchandise. It doesn't have to be caskets. It just happens to be an easier way to give an example of using a sales frequency chart, but it really could be used for any part of the sales offerings that you have. So, and in the merchandising book on page 142, the Darman book, they point out that it's important to the financial well-being of any funeral home to make sure that you optimize your offerings, to make sure that you're bringing value to the client, that you're also generating profit. Those are, as we had mentioned before, what some of the things that go into the price determination, so that we can now offer to our clients in terms of price quotation. And that's where we're going to move on to at the end of this. So the sales frequency, the number of times sales are given in a price bracket, occurred over a fixed period of time. So in that example within Excel, that was a month's time. We had 28 or 29 caskets, depending on which part of that, which part of the spreadsheet we were looking at. So that would be the number of units that were sold in that month's time. And some of the advantages, of course, in doing this is to making sure that you recognize what's selling well, what's not selling well. Those are the two critical parts, and can possibly give you even an idea of what's going on in terms of the actual selling of caskets in the showroom. Could be not necessarily a price thing, could be more of a, why is something selling? Maybe it's the position in the prep room, or excuse me, in the showroom, and maybe you need to move something in a different area if you want to encourage the sale. So we've already talked about this: the average, which is the mean, the median, the mode, and then a quartile is literally taking all of the sales in this case and dividing them in quarters. So the upper quartile is the top sales, which would represent 76 to 100%. The next quartile down would represent from 50% to 75%. The quartile below that would actually be 26% to 50%. I think I said the other one would be 51 to 75. The third quartile being 26 to 49, or excuse me, 50%, and then the last one from 1 to 25%. So splitting something up into 4 separate versions is considered to be a quartile. And the range, just like it was in that example, our range started with 8,500 was the most expensive casket. The least expensive was 1,795. So the range is the number that's between those upper and lower limits. So we'll move on now to price quotation, which is, of course, the method by which prices are explained to the consumer. And we generally do that, with the itemization general price list, and then eventually with the statement of funeral goods and services selected that's given to the consumer. So as we look on pages 148 to 149, the breakdown would be, we're kind of going a little bit backwards, but this is where we are today, which is itemization. We'll talk a little bit about package pricing, about unit pricing, by unit pricing, and functional pricing. So I know that some of you may be writing those things down, but we're going to cover each one of them individually. So itemization is the method of price quotation by which each unit of service and or merchandise is priced separately. This is now required by the FTC, and early funeral homes and in those days, undertakers, as they were called, were using some type of itemization, not to the same level probably that we do now. It wasn't required, but they did dabble into that to some degree. And we have to look at the 16 different items that are required by the FTC, the way that things are packaged, the way that there are certain items that have to be explained a certain way, for instance, with an alternative container, and that if you choose a casket, or if you choose a funeral in which cremation is the disposition, that you don't need to purchase a casket necessarily, but might need to provide a minimum container, or sometimes called an alternative container. So the considerations for itemization. Number one would be the importance of the activity. So how, when we're looking at not just casket prices or vault prices at this point, not looking necessarily at merchandise, but we're looking at all of the items that are included in a general price list. So, we start with our basic service charge. We have an embalming charge. We have dressing and casketing. We have sanitary care. We move on to use of the facilities. And so, we're talking about the use of funeral home for visitation or some other venue. Maybe there's a funeral service. We're looking at maybe a license that's required to go to the crematory, graveside service, all of these different activities. And we have to first have an understanding as to what the importance of that activity is to the overall pricing scheme. We have to look at what the pay scale of the employees who perform the task. Is it something fairly simple? Is it something that requires a license? For instance, on a removal, often a licensed funeral director might be out on a removal, but it is not required by law, and so you might use someone that's going to perform that task that is not, because they're not licensed, maybe you can pay them something less than you would for a licensee. Looking at the percentage of the building that's used for the task. For instance, you may use a very small part of the building for an arrangement, but you're going to use a larger percentage of the building for visitation. The time that's devoted not only to the task, but the preparation of the task is part of that. The frequency and the use of whatever the selection. For instance, you're pricing embalming, but if you're not embalming very much, maybe it's because it's priced too high. So thinking about the overall frequency of performing that task is important to evaluate. What the known rate or the scale is for payment, whether you're using some trade service or trade people, and understanding what they may be charging, and then what you would turn around to charge the consumer. competitive factors. So, what is your competition generally charging? Are they charging a lot more? Are they charging a lot less? For things like the use of the building and embalming and dressing and casketing, all those kinds of things. Those numbers are kind of all over the board depending on what funeral home you're talking about. The position of the firm. So, are you brand new to the market? Or are you actually in a position that you've been around for a long time? Within the community, what is your position? And then you want to establish a reasonable markup as well for that's going to include some profit in there for the funeral home and for the owner and others. So package pricing, this is a pricing method which groups together selected services and/or merchandise. And it's allowed by the FTC. And what probably our most common package price, if you were in class right now, I would ask that question and you would come up, I'm sure, with the answer. That is the direct cremation package, which would include all the things that you need for the cremation, not necessarily anything else. And by that method, it's allowed to, you're allowed to give one price that would include the basic service charge, for instance, the removal charge, the use of the hearse to go to the crematory, if that's what you need to do, the license that's required to go there, the alternative container in many cases, and all that. You can package it up as one price and not have to break them out individually. So unit pricing. Now we're kind of going back in time. So unit pricing is something that was used by early on, and it's a method in which one prices the price would include both the service and the casket. So the only thing that's really changing is the casket itself. So in the 1960s, this was very popular. Then, of course, by the 80s, we were required to itemize. So this would be an example of all the things that would be included. And the only thing that would be different would be the price of the casket. And in that price for the casket would include all these other things, because generally people did the same basic funeral. They had a day or two of visitation, depending on your community. They went to church, went to a cemetery. And so all those things were fairly common and could be lumped together. And because it was basically, I hate to use this term, but it was more cookie cutter than it is, than it certainly is now. So by unit pricing is not terribly different. It includes a lot of the same things. The only difference is now we're going to separately show the price of the service to be rendered and the price of the casket. So we're going to have the service cost plus our casket cost, and now that's going to give us our total price of the funeral. Okay, so we're talking about the by unit pricing, and so now it's the service cost, and the casket cost will be the total price of the funeral. So the only thing different, over in here, we had just the casket before, so it's still going to include all those same things. It's just now we're going to say the casket, instead of the total funeral being $10,000, we're going to now say the casket is $3,000 and the services were $7,000. So that's really the only difference between those two. Again, it's a technique that's not really used very much anymore since the FTC required the itemization. Functional pricing is a method in which the charges are broken down into several major components. As we get a little closer now towards itemization, it isn't completely, but it's a lot closer. And the four categories are professional services, facilities, transportation, and the casket cost. So this is really everything except the cash advances for the funeral. Now we'll move on to pricing strategies, and this is how we come up with is kind of a combination between pricing determination and the actual price quotation. And what types of general philosophies are used by different funeral homeowners and so forth. So this can be found on page 149 in the Clicker book. The first of which is competitive pricing. So products that are sold that will be priced about the same as those that are offered by your competitors, maybe with a little bit of difference, but for the most part, it's going to be fairly consistent. Penetration pricing, or products that are priced lower than those offered by the competitor. So it might be a new, might be something that you're offering for the first time. You're trying to lure the customer in a way, or the client, the family, to come to you because you happen to be lower than the competition. For instance, on your basic service charge, your competition is charging $2,500 and you charge $19.95. Well, that particular cost is lower, and your other things may be higher, but in that case, that may provide some additional sales for you. Oddball pricing, and this is not used in funeral service all that much, but certainly in other industries, combining two or more products in the price. So an example would be you're selling something, 3 for $5. So you might be able to do that with smaller items like prayer cards or acknowledgement cards or something like, or urns, where you offer a discount for buying multiple things. We're obviously not going to be buying multiple caskets or vaults and those kinds of things, so it'd be something smaller. Prestige pricing is setting a relatively high price for the product. So you're thought of as being the premier product supplier, and therefore by setting high prices, it's thought of to the consumer that it's there should be a lot of value and so forth based on the higher prices. Skimming is charging a high price for the product, so your firm might be the only one that's offering it, and therefore you kind of set the price. So you might be charging a high price in that way because you're the only one that has the particular product. Leader pricing is pricing one or few items at very low prices to attract consumers. This is really used probably more in grocery stores, retail stores. You could kind of use an example in funeral service with a cemetery, where a cemetery might sell the plot for a fairly low price. Let's say it's $900. So now the consumer has purchased the grave, but when it comes time to actually open and close the grave and setting fees for a monument, those could be quite high. So you're making up for charging the lower price on purchasing the grave. And once the grave has been purchased, there's little choice that the consumer has if they're going to use it. I mean, they need to open and close it. They have to do it through the cemetery, and the same thing with setting the monument. So odd number pricing, avoids using round numbers when pricing their products. So, the reality is that someone should be able to figure out that $199 is really $200. It's only $1 off of that. So, but philosophically, and sometimes, for people, if they see the price of $199, to them it seems, in a way, significantly less than $200. Once that number of 200 is placed there, there's a different feeling from the consumer. So this is opportunistic pricing, price gouging, and this is highly not only in many cases is very illegal, but because when you take advantage of the consumer by setting your prices for a product, supply and demand is one thing, but for instance, if you were selling a bag of ice after a hurricane for $9 when the normal price would be $2, that's not fair to the consumer, and that would be price gouging. Okay, so we'll get into selecting a vendor, and then we're getting towards the end of this PowerPoint. So When we're now selecting a vendor for the funeral home for, what generally would be caskets, burial vaults, we have some choices. They tend to be larger items. And there's some different considerations that we need to take into account when we're either selecting a new one or thinking about changing. So the first thing to do is to think of the product line itself, the quality, the availability, certainly the price, protection of the buyer's interest, so warranties and things like that. What exactly is being offered by the vendor. Their delivery times. Can you get something the same day? Does it take 2 or 3 days to get, especially when caskets are involved? But it could be urns or some other vendor. How long does it take for the, do they stock most of the items, or are they made, just bore you order them? So those are all things to take into account. Looking at the trade credit terms, and we're going to talk specifically about some, and a lot of them are not used very much anymore. But you want to find out from the vendor whether or not you need to pay right away, or if they're going to offer you either a discount for paying sooner, or will they give you some time to pay, whether it's 30 or 60 days or something along those lines, if you order from them. So looking at a cash discount, and that can sometimes be a big factor, whether or not that's offered. So you'll see this not just in funeral service, but in a lot of other things. If you have anything to do with accounts receivable or accounts payable, you'll see these terms often. And if you see it written like this, 2/10 net 30, that means a 2% discount is offered within the first 10 days of the invoice. And then the net of the invoice would need to be paid within 30 days. So there it is in writing, 2% discount if the bill is paid within 10, and the total invoice would be net due in 30 days. So some other terms, some of them are a little dated and you probably wouldn't see them much, but I guess they still end up on a national board test occasionally. So if the terms were that it needed to be paid by the middle of the month, that would be represented as MOM, or middle of month. EOM as the end of the month. So no matter when the invoice was generated, by the end of the month, it would need to be paid. CWO is cash with order. So in other words, you have to pay for it when you order the item. Cash, or could be credit, but we're just saying that it needs to be paid when the order is placed. CBD is cash before delivery, not having anything to do with cannabis, but rather cash before delivery. So you can place the order, but before it's going to be delivered, it would need to be fully paid. And last is COD, which many of us are familiar with, and that should be cash on delivery, not case on delivery, but cash on delivery. So COD is basically when the item arrives, it should be paid for with a check or a credit card or something, but cleared up once that's been made. So some other considerations when thinking about a vendor, you think about the sales representatives themselves, and this especially is important when it comes to some of the sundry items, which is a term I'm not sure if we've talked about before, but they're accommodation type items, that smaller things like register books and prayer cards and acknowledgement cards, urns, things like that are smaller in price and so forth. But your casket representative can really be can be a partner. They'll understand their product line very well, and especially when you have some sort of an oddball request, they can be very, very helpful. So having a good relationship with them and making sure that they're reachable and so forth is very important. What kind of point of sale materials are available? So catalogs, brochures, flyers, what kind of things can you show the consumer? It may not be the actual product itself, but something that you can email to them. Is there a website that you can use? All those things are important, and whether or not that particular vendor has a good amount of point of sale materials to offer. and making sure that they update them from time to time as well. That's also important. So some merchandising assistance, what kind of support is there if you need some help along the way. It may not be from the sales rep themselves, but how available is the company? Do they answer the phones 24 hours a day, or is it only during Monday through Friday until 5 o'clock? Those are all items to think about. And then their overall reputation. So do they have a good reputation? Are they brand new in the market? Is their reputation that they're cheap providers and the quality is not that great, but the price might be better? Asking some others about their reputation and doing some digging, would certainly be worth the time spent to do that. And then, whether they offer accommodation merchandise, so merchandise that's other than what they offer. So a casket company, for instance, that offers jewelry and urns and it could be customized acknowledgement cards, things like that are not their main source of revenue. They're not their main business, but do they have other things that they offer as well? So lastly, we'll touch base here on price pointing, and then that will finish up this component. So this came out of it didn't have anything to do with funeral service, but is often used in evaluating customer behavior, what the customer's perception based on a price that was in front of them, what they thought of without even knowing what the product was or anything, what type of product they thought that they were going to be shown. And it's this good, better, and best philosophy. So in order to give to the customer a price that would give them just an idea without knowing anything else, would be done in this way. So it's usually in a logical progression of value to the consumer. So if we're talking about caskets, then caskets in the lowest price line would be considered good. I mean, we're not going to say that they're cheap or use terminology like that, but they're good, but they're the lower end of the quality. They're the lower end of features and so forth. So those would end in a 95, and so something that would be $18.95 or $17.95 or $9.95. It's that price that's just below, jumping to the next rounded number. Again, $17.95. The reality is it's $1,800, but $17.95 sounds better. So caskets in the middle, or the better price line, would end in a 25 or a 75. And we try to do this kind of consistently throughout when we're talking about caskets. If we're pricing them and then use this philosophy, you'll give the consumer that impression that something that was priced that ends in a 25 or 75 would be something better than the entry level, but not the premier. And that would be your caskets in your best price line. These would be considered, more of your premier items, and they would end in a 0 or 50. So, something that's $38.50 or rather than saying something is $17.95, you're going to say this is $4,000. No sense making it $39.90 or $39.95. Call it what it is. It's $4,000, and those that are in that price category that are going to possibly be buying something like that would almost appreciate that price point is, it gives a certain amount of perceived value. All right, so that would be it for that PowerPoint. I'm going to now see about getting it uploaded into the lesson, into lesson 4, under the pricing component. And I'll see you in class soon.